Welcome to our class called Personality and Counseling Theories. This semester, we're going to be looking at a number of basic ideas, concepts, theories behind the counseling profession, or on which the process of counseling is based. We won't be able to look at every one of them, but we will look at some of the older ones, the foundational ones, the historic folks in the counseling profession, and then we will look at how other theories kind of evolved from those. We'll also talk about integration. Part of what you're studying and the context in which you were studying at B.H. Carroll is that counseling is not something that is accomplished in a vacuum. It is something that, as believers, as Christians, we come to that process differently. So it's not just going in and applying a certain theory or a mindset that you may have or that you may have learned in a graduate school program. It is also synthesizing that information with the truth of the scripture, a theological understanding, as well as a psychological understanding. I've encountered an article, and I'll post it for you this semester, um, that's entitled Theology as Queen, Psychology as Handmaiden. The pretense of that paper is that all too often when we integrate, we get it backward. We allow psychology to inform theology rather than theology informing and helping us deal with our psychology. And so this semester we'll talk about that a little bit, but not as much as you will or will have already discussed in other classes in which you've actually studied integration and thought about that more. But you do need to understand that. Each of the theories that we go through we'll look at in the context of theology, we'll look at the basic premise of each theory, the ideas behind that theory, the concepts, and then we will look at the techniques or ideas that came out of that theory that we apply in the counseling setting, and then we will try to evaluate them theologically. One of the problems that you run into when you try to integrate, particularly in most of the core ideas of psychology, is they don't meld very well with theological principles. One of the reasons being the people who developed those ideas about human nature were not Christians. They didn't start with a biblical understanding of human beings as sinful. In fact, many of the humanistic theories that we'll talk about are theories that basically say we're our own person and we create our own reality. And whatever it is we become, we are here to form that for ourselves. That's totally opposite. That's the antithesis of the theological understanding of who God is and who we are created in his image and his likeness. Now, there may be some things in humanistic psychology, for example, some of the writings of Carl Rogers and his ideas behind the necessary qualities of counseling. I think those are valid ideas. You have probably heard them. I know if you've been in my class with the basic skills class, you've talked about those basic ideas that Rogers put forth as necessary and sufficient conditions for counseling to occur. The reality is, though, that was for us to seek out our own understanding and determine our own path. As Christians, we don't believe that. We believe we're made by God, and that as believers, He saved us, and He saved us for His purpose. It's not our life to guide. It's not our life to control. It's God's. And so we relinquish control to God to guide us, and then we obey. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said that only he who believes is obedient, and only he who is obedient believes. As Christians, that's what we believe. And so as we go through this semester, we will look at those theories and those ideas that are the formation of our field, as well as try to evaluate how those theories fit or maybe not fit very well with our Christian theology. And that truly is a difficult thing. There are people who argue, like Jay Adams and those who write about the biblical counseling process, that it can't be done at all. And that's outlined probably in things that you've read. But let's get back a minute just to this course in theories. So here's kind of how we go and what I want you to understand. If you're going to be able to help somebody in counseling, if you're going to be able to try to intervene in some way in the things in their life that they bring to you in counseling, you have to understand how people are put together. In the curriculum that you have, and there's kind of a mindset for why the curriculum is the way it is, you've studied how people are put together, how people are formed, how people develop. You usually call that human growth and development, or some kind of development class. You have one in our curriculum. You also have courses in which you talk about uh, how people make decisions, for example, in their careers and their lives and those types of things. So basically, what those courses try to teach you is, what does a person look like? How are they made? How do they develop? How do they make their choices? Those kinds of things. That's helping us understand what we're supposed to be as a human being, what we're supposed to look like. So I would call that normal behavior, normal psychology, if you want to call it that. Then you will take a course in the middle somewhere that's called abnormal psychology or psychopathology. In that course, you will understand how people get broken, how the things that affect us influence our lives, how they change us, how they hurt us, how they traumatize us, and how we develop thinking or emotional patterns in our lives based on those things that usually end up being unhealthy. So it's basically a picture in your human growth and development class of what a human being is supposed to look like, and what, if all things are perfect, we would how we would turn out. Then you have a class called the abnormal psychology or psychopathology class that helps us understand how people get broken. So you've got what we're supposed to look like, how we get broken. In this course, we're going to talk about how to restore as much as possible the normality for a person's life who is broken. You can't help a person be restored to wholeness and health unless you know what they're supposed to look like in a normal pattern. And I realize we're all broken. Nobody's perfect. I understand that. But the process of counseling and psychotherapy is to try to help restore health and normality. You can't do that if you don't know what health and normality looks like, nor can you do that if you don't understand how those contributors affected a life that caused them to be broken. So in this class, we're going to look at, what do you do to help restore health and wholeness to that person. And in order to do that, you have to understand these other concepts. Part of the idea behind this class being called personality and counseling theories is that we're going to learn how the human personality is put together. And most of the theories, particularly the early theories, the guys like Freud and Adler and Jung, they conceptualized the whole person. They talked about the growth and development of a person. When you study Sigmund Freud, you study human growth and development, you study psychopathology, and then you study psychotherapy. And it's all one seamless process. Now, people may not have much to do with Freud today, but what you see in his theory is this common thread of all of those things that fit together that end up in the restorative process to restore what the person would have looked like, or hopefully would have looked like, in the beginning. All the other theories, Adler as well, had the same idea about how we grow and what we learn and how we do that, and then how those things that are negative in our life affect us, how they change how we see ourselves. Particularly, one of the things that Adler discussed was inferiority and this striving for superiority and this striving to change. Adler even observed people in one of his books that he wrote that he called organ inferiority. And it wasn't just a psychological sense of inferiority, but he studied people that had handicaps, physical handicaps. And he saw how those people would overcompensate for their physical handicap. You may have heard that people who are blind may have particular sensitivities in other ways that heighten their ability to perceive and their sensation. And it's very similar to that. And so Adler wrote about them. But what he understood was that people would compensate for and try to overcome those inferiorities. And his theory was built in part on that idea, in great part. And then how do you help that person get through those things? So we have to have an understanding not only of how do we fix somebody, but how do we actually understand what a person's supposed to look like, and how do we restore that? And that's what we'll be doing this semester. This is a pivotal course in what you will study. Theories is at the core of everything that we do in counseling. And the theories that we'll study will be a big part, as I've mentioned in some of the course material, in the licensing exam. One of the largest sections in the licensing exam covers material on theories and the helping relationship, as it's usually described in the study materials. But that's the theories behind what we do. It's the largest section on the counselor exam. So it's important to know these things. This course is also a lot of reading. Get a lot of criticism every year about how much you have to read for this course. The reality is there's no way to understand this material without doing a lot of reading. I've noted in some of the welcome comments elsewhere that we all go through that. We've all spent hours and hours and hours in digging into articles and information and books. I have sections in books here in my library about Freud and about Adler. And, it takes time to understand those things. I One of my colleagues used to just say, well, just teach them cognitive behavioral therapy, just teach them CBT. That's all people need to know. That would be simple, and maybe you will one day be a person who predominantly practices out of a CBT model. It's what most people do today. But here's the reality. If you don't understand the theories that we're going to discuss, you really don't understand CBT, because CBT itself comes out of the premise of these theories we will discuss. And if you don't understand those ideas, then how can you practice something that you really don't understand? You may have a nice little notebook of CBT handouts, but the reality is, will you really understand what CBT is all about? And that's what this course will help you do. It will help you consider the theoretical underpinnings of all that we do. And it is intensive with reading. I understand that. And I apologize, but it just simply has to be that. Don't want to overburden you. But I also know that you have to read and understand these things. As we go along, one of the things that you'll do this semester is you will be picking a theory that will go along with a paper. And so I even encourage you now to begin to think about the theories and what you may know about some of the theories, and one that may particularly jump out at you. But as you are reading, think about developing a paper on that theory. It doesn't necessarily have to be what you think you will do as a clinician, but something that begins to work with you. I would encourage you to write a paper, perhaps, or think about writing a paper on some of the older guys, just to get their ideas and to see what they thought about, to see how their life influenced them. I wrote a major paper for my doctoral degree there at B.H. Carroll on Alfred Adler. I spent a lot of time just studying his life and all about his life, not just his theories, but studying Adler himself. Because a lot of what we do, in fact, what you'll do as a counselor, one of the things I'll post this semester is an assessment that you can take to kind of show you what theory you will probably tend to navigate toward, or to be drawn to. I'm drawn to the things in certain theories because they fit with who I am and how I am as a person. That's one reason I probably migrated toward Adler. But that's kind of what we'll do with this semester as we go through this. Let me encourage you. If you have questions, if you have thoughts about the class, please be in touch with me. Feel free to do that. I hope this has been helpful and a bit of an introduction to the class this week. I look forward to being with you this semester as we talk about the personality, the development of the personality, and counseling theories, and look at those things in the concepts, in the context of our theological understanding of human beings as well.